All right, today I'm talking to Meridith Elliott Powell. She's the founder of Motion First. It's a company that supports business in currently turbulent times and helps leaders change their perspective for the better. She brings hope and concrete strategies for dealing with uncertainty. She's also a motivational speaker and the author and co-author of 9 books, of which her latest is titled Thrive: Strategies to Turn Uncertainty into a Competitive Advantage. And this book, I think, is very fitting and welcome in today's turbulent times. I found Meridith through her work on and her books on sales, and initially wanted to pick her brains on the topic of follow-up, but now I really want to talk to you about this uncertainty and how to turn it into a competitive advantage. So thanks so much for taking the time today and talk with me. First, let me ask you, change and uncertainty, actually they're a fact of life.
Yeah.
There's always uncertainty. And I think that we often mistake certainty for actually stability because that's simply more comfortable. Mm-hmm. Why is it that people in general get so uncomfortable? And when uncertainty becomes visible and actual, that's when we really get nervous instead of appreciating it. How can we appreciate uncertainty for what it is?
You know, it's a really interesting question. And when I first started researching it, one of the most fascinating things I found about uncertainty is that it is, even in good economic times, even when your business is flourishing or your life is going great, we have so much fear around uncertainty that it actually hinders growth and prevents us from reaching our potential. And what I've really boiled it down to is that I just think as human beings, we want control. And the higher the level of uncertainty, the least amount of control. Now, control is a myth. You can never have it. But it's we like predictability, even if the predictability is negative or bad. We would rather know that something bad is going to happen. So to begin to change it, you have to begin to flip the script and think differently about uncertainty.
And how do we do that? How can we change that perspective? Because obviously, like I said, in leading up to the question, I think there's always actually uncertainty. And also prior to COVID, because everyone was with COVID-19, like, oh, this is, now everything becomes visible. But I think it's always like that. It can just switch like that. But how can we change it? How can we appreciate that uncertainty actually? What are the opportunities that are in the uncertainty?
Well, the truth is there's so much opportunity and uncertainty. But I think what you need to do is number one, is you have to make a conscious decision to start to think about uncertainty as opportunity. I mean, it's just like any good habit that you apply, whether you decide you're going to exercise, whether you decide you're going to eat right, whether you decide you're going to be disciplined in any area of your life, you just have to make the decision that you are going to be somebody who believes that uncertainty can bring opportunity. But one exercise that I give all of my clients is just look at the last 10 to 20 years of your life. Just do a little backwards timeline and think about all the things that happened out of nowhere, things you didn't plan for, and the good things they brought into your life. I mean, you went into a party. So at that party, you almost didn't go, but you met the person that you fell in love with and you built a life with. It was that, a chance happening of mentioning to somebody that you weren't happy in your job, that they said, well, I know somebody that you ought to meet. And it led to the next opportunity. I mean, everything in our life, whether it's good or bad, and a lot more good, happened because of something we couldn't control. So it's an exercise I love to walk through people, because if we don't embrace uncertainty, then you're going to miss a lot of the good things that are going to happen in your life.
Yeah, I really like that. It's about a change of perspective. And it's true because I think, and it's true for me, but I think it's true for almost everyone, that if we look back on the almost synchronicity of the little things that happened and the decision where we turned left instead of right, and that led us to X, Y, Z. I mean, everyone has these stories, and indeed, it's the mystery of life, and it's uncertainty at its finest in a way.
Yeah, but you do have to condition your mind to think that way. I mean, we are programmed to believe that uncertainty is a negative. And I haven't decided whether we're born that way or whether society gives us those messages. But the other is there's so much negativity coming at you every single day. I mean, the amount of messages out there, whether they're on social media or the news, is programming us to look at life as if it is a glass half empty. And what you want to do is start to program yourself to think of it differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you said it already before, it has a lot to do with control.
Yeah.
We like this feeling of being in control. And I guess also before COVID happened, we had the feeling that we were more than now in control because everything was going as we planned and there was no big surprises and things were going our way. How can we change our mind when it comes to this? Because control is a myth, actually. There's no control. You said it yourself.
There's none.
How can we change our mind or this perception on control? And actually,
yeah. You know, there's when I was researching the book, there was a great study done from the military, the United States military. And there's a great saying in the United States military called "embrace the suck." Not very scientific, but it's, you know, it is what it means. And basically the reason that's a term is because the thought is in war, it isn't the optimists who survive and it isn't the pessimists who survive, but it's the realists who survive. The people who, you know, the thing about control is you can paint a picture that you're in control. You can be so optimistic and say life is going to work out and everything is beautiful. But it shows us that people like that aren't prepared for the harsh times in front of them. And then the pessimists just see life so negative, they can never see the opportunity. So what you want to do is be a realist. And when you're a realist, you embrace the suck. You say, you know what? These past 18 months have been awful, but I'm going to focus on what I can control and forget about the rest. Yeah. That has been one of the most powerful lessons that I have learned from individuals and companies that are successful no matter what, is they can clearly make a list of everything giving them anxiety, everything that they're worried about, everything they fear. And then you divide that list into what you can have an impact on and what you have no control over. And the difference between people who make it and people who don't is the people who make it focus on what they can control. Now, I just want to add to that I think that's amazing because I just told you that the most important thing you need to be successful, the most critical, in fact, the only ingredient you have control over. I just gave you control in the middle of uncertainty. You can control what you focus on. Yeah. So therefore, I'm not going to stress about the fact that I don't know when I'm going to be able to travel internationally again. Yeah. I got no idea. You and I were talking before we got on here. I don't know when you can go back to Myanmar, but there are things in your life you can control. And if you can stop fretting about the stuff you can't and focus on what you can, it's like magic.
Yeah. Yeah, Stephen Covey, he's created this circle of control and the circle of influence. And we spend way too much time in our circle of influence and we need to move it into the circle of control, the things we can actually, you know, have direct impact on instead of the things that we're just, the circle of concern and the circle of influence.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was with you.
Yeah. For your book, Thrive Strategies to Turn Uncertainty to Competitive Advantage, you've analyzed and studied 9 companies and their leadership. I'm really curious, what traits did these companies and their leadership have? Because they're all from different industries. Yeah. What did they have in common with regard to dealing with uncertainty? And they've been around. I mean, they're from the 17th, 18th century. They've been around and they've passed through the Second World War. They passed through the pandemic and they're still thriving. So what is their commonality there?
Yeah, you know, it was so interesting when I started studying them. The first thing I got was, boy, what they have come through made COVID look like nothing. Yeah. So there was almost a feeling of motivation and hope from the fact that people have been through so much worse than we have. I mean, when I was thinking back to a company being around in the middle of a world war, you don't know how long that's going to last. And you don't even know if your way of life is going to continue. Yeah. Think about living with that level of anxiety, right? But the traits that they had in common really came down to a 9-step formula that I created. As I studied them, I was looking for those common themes, the things that they all did that positioned them for success. And they may have had a little bit of a different spin,
Mhm.
but the all 9 were there, and it has to be all 9. You can't skip one, but it begins with a relentless vision in the sense that you are clear on where you're headed and clear on where you're going.
Yeah.
You can see past the crisis and uncertainty. You
Yeah.
have to believe you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once you do that, and I call it a relentless vision, because for most companies, a vision is something that's in our strategic plan or something you put on a wall. A relentless vision is something you talk about, you think about, and you visualize every single day. I mean, you're so focused on it, you can't help but accomplish it. The second is conditioning yourself for change. These companies didn't wait for change to happen. They anticipated the changes coming in the marketplace, meaning that every leader was thinking about how the marketplace was changing and how it was shifting and what they needed to do now in order to be prepared for those changes and those shifts. One of the examples I use in the book is a company that everybody in the world knows, which is Jim Beam. You know, who doesn't love a good whiskey, or a good bourbon? And in the United States, we came up with this crazy idea that liquor by the drink and making liquor should become illegal. And in the 1920s, we made it illegal. Well, nobody in the distillery business believed that that would ever happen. Nobody except Jim Beam. So he prepared for it. So when making whiskey became illegal, he had other forms of income that he could support his business and prepare for when making liquor would be legal again. So while all of his competitors were declaring bankruptcy, he was still building his business. So, we live in a time when there's more happening outside of your business than inside it that can impact your ability to be successful. So you have to start to predict the future. Strategy number 3 is you quit competing, you start collaborating. Is that the challenges that we're facing are too big for one business, one industry, one organization to solve. So it isn't that you can't solve your own challenges, but saving resources and saving time. So if you have somebody else who already understands how to do it, how can you pool your resources and work together? We saw this in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, we needed to get our grocery store shelves full. So we saw truck drivers and companies working together in order to help us keep toilet paper on the shelves. Number 4, I loved is that I never saw this one coming. The most difficult thing to do in the middle of uncertainty is make decisions. When you have no idea what's going to happen in the world, how do you know where to put your time, energy, money, et cetera? And every company I researched had a clear set of core values. They knew who they were and what they were about. And they made their decisions according to their core values. They used them like a litmus test. If it aligned with their core values, they did it. If it didn't, they let it go. And somehow your core values will carry you through any challenge. They'll help you make the right decisions in a aligned atmosphere. I'm so fascinated by values that they're going to be my next book.
It's really interesting because actually I studied international relations first, and then I did change management, business administration. And for both of my masters, I actually studied vision, implementation, success. So which companies were successful in implementing their visions and for which it was just a picture on the wall and they didn't really execute it successfully. And the value part is a critical part. And actually to spend time with values when you're comfortable and when you're not feeling stressed and there's no anxiety, and to really reflect on this helps you tremendously when you are under pressure and stress and you need to make decisions. So what you're telling me about decision making in relation to values, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, it's like I said, I'm so fascinated by it that I'm working on the research right now for the next book. Strategy number 5 is my favorite strategy of all because it's about making money in the middle of uncertainty, and it's one of the best times to make money. But these companies understood that you make it from the inside out, meaning that in uncertainty, we tend to chase any business we can find. These companies understood that they needed to start with their existing customers, talk to, understand, interview their existing customers. And the reason is because what you sold before the uncertainty, we'll just use COVID as an example.
Mhm.
What you sold before COVID can't be what you're selling now. It may be the same product, but the problem that your customer is facing is
It's
different.
different. Yeah.
And selling in the middle of a pandemic is about being relevant. My
Yeah.
favorite story from this is about Procter and Gamble, P&G. Procter and Gamble is a worldwide company everybody knows, but what a lot of people don't know is that they were started in the 1700s by two men who married sisters, Procter and Gamble.
Huh.
And they competed for animal fat. And one night they were arguing at the dining room table in Cincinnati, Ohio, and their future father-in-law said, "Boys, quit fighting and quit competing and just start a company." And Procter and Gamble was born. Well, the first product they were going to put on the market was soap. And true to form, they didn't put soap on the market until they talked to customers about it. What do you like? What do you not like?
Mm.
And what they discovered was people loved soap, but there was a major problem with soap. When you used it and you lathered up, soap would slip out of your hands and it would fall to the bottom of the bathtub and you couldn't find it. And customers told Procter and Gamble, they said, "We want a soap that floats." Procter and Gamble shot air into a bar of soap and Ivory soap was born. And it was tagged the soap that floats, not the soap that didn't sink. They took exactly what their customers had told them. By the end of the 1800s, they were $1 million company.
By listening to their customer and solving a problem that was actually existing.
Yeah. So
By
their
being relevant.
competitor. Yeah. And so you can grow in the middle of a pandemic, but you have to solve the right problem. It's probably the biggest mistakes I see companies making right now is that they're not paying attention to the fact that the problem has changed.
Yeah.
Number 6 is build your network, change your life. All of these companies were incredibly connected. So when challenge or obstacles got in the way, they had the connections they needed to pull the strings. Crane and Company is a paper company. They make fancy stationery. And during the Great Depression here across the world, when nobody was sending thank you notes or party invitations, they had connections into the federal government and got their paper to be supplied to make the US dollar. So they found a market based on their connections. Number 7 is to strengthen your team. There's so little you control in today's marketplace, but attracting the best and the brightest, having the strongest team around you will make sure you can get through any catastrophe. Every company I interviewed has always had a strong succession plan. Number 8 is to shed fast and keep moving. That through no fault of your own, understand that what you're doing now won't necessarily work 6 months from now. And the reason it won't work 6 months is because the marketplace changed.
Mhm.
And last but not least is to rinse and repeat, to consistently be doing these strategies over and over and over again.
That's interesting. Actually, yeah. A method that I developed based on the research that I did was also the recalibration at the end of the cycle. Then you just start again, and you have to, because it's a continuous process. You have to keep doing it. I recognize it very much. You mentioned strengthening your team, especially in times of crisis. Is that the time to do it? Because
absolutely. In times of crisis, it's probably more important than ever because you have no resources to waste. There's no fat in the margin. Anything could propel your business forward or could take it under. You need to build a team as passionate as you are about the growth of your company. And think about this. When uncertainty hits, people tend to disengage. They're just trying not to get fired. So they quit trying, they quit engaging, they quit taking a risk. Your leadership skills to build that team. The other thing is, as a leader, you got to cut the fat. If people are not pulling their weight, you can't have them on your team. I mean, it just is all that stuff you didn't handle when economic times were good. There's just no time to waste.
Yeah, because I can imagine that, especially when times are difficult, that you have to cut costs, and therefore, obviously, also at some point, I mean, we had to do this in Myanmar. We had to let people go, and so I hear you on the one side, but on the other side, you don't know. Like the example of managing a company through the Second World War, you don't know when it's going to end. You don't know if the reality that you knew will come back. And in that context, still to hire and to strengthen the team or to build the team, or is it to focus on the people in the company itself instead of like attracting new talent?
Oh, I think it's a couple of things. Number one, I think it's the fact that you really need to absolutely so many. I had very few companies that I worked with that were able to add team members. Even companies that were doing well were fearful to do it. But by strengthening the team, I mean a couple of things. Number one is, as you look to furlough, make sure that you're not furloughing by position. You're furloughing by level of passion to keep those people on the team that really care as much as you do about the growth of your team. The other is, as you let employees go, you have to manage that cycle of how are you going to keep this other group from being fearful that they're next? I mean, you have to build a culture that is transparent with people, that's open with them, that helps them understand. You have to keep relationships with those people that you let go, because you may want to bring them back as things turn around and things get better, and and as things get stronger. You're and developing and investing in those people that you've decided to keep on board is really important.
Yeah, especially in those times, because I
Absolutely.
imagine you built relationships for a very long time also with those people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Question in relation to that, maybe this will come in your next book on values, but I could imagine you mentioned focusing on the passionate people who align with your big audacious goal, who feel the same passionate. Is there also a link with regard to the values? Does this mean that values are shared?
Yeah. In fact, when it comes to values, and we talk about this, and this will be in my next book, is when I talk about making decisions according to your values, some of the biggest decisions you need to make are with your employees and with your customers.
Yeah.
If you choose and if you hire and promote employees who share your values, you're going to be more successful as an organization. If you and I share the same values and we work together, it's almost like a secret language that's happening with each other. We just get it.
Which we don't have to
explain
speak.
Exactly. And I do that with my clients, with their employees, but it's also we put their customers through the value filter as well.
I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
You'll drive profitability but you can work with less customers and increase profitability because you have an alignment of values. Yeah. Values are so critically important. But if you want people to care, they have to share the same values as you.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah. We talked about the impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic and how uncertainty is huge and vast, and we can't control what happens in the broader economy. And we have, in the context of COVID-19, also very limited impact. How does one turn this uncertainty then in a competitive advantage? Because we've talked about these 9 points, but where lies the competitive advantage in this uncertainty? Please help me see that.
Yeah, when you put the 9 strategies in place, when you use that methodology, the biggest thing that I wanted to do with the book was when I asked people, when uncertainty hits, are you somebody who runs to the sound of the gunfire and takes action? Do you run towards the uncertainty? Or are you somebody who's a little more fearful and you take more of a wait and see approach? The majority of people take more of a wait and see approach. Exactly. They want to take action, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah,
and where the competitive advantage comes in is I've taken all the guesswork out of what to do. You no longer have to think about it. If you put these strategies into place, you now have a process and a methodology that is going to lead you into opportunity, that is going to create the competitive advantage in the marketplace. Why? Because one, your confidence increases in how you're going to navigate this path. The second is your competitor is not doing this.
Yeah, that's true. Because a lot of times, indeed, we focus on the problems. We focus on, indeed, the things that we cannot control. Well, we should shift our focus to what we can control.
Yeah, and the thing about the formula is that you have to use all 9 steps. The sad part is probably those of us, especially who run to the sound of the gunfire, are doing some of these steps. Like you might be really good at strengthening your team, or maybe you are relentless about the vision. But if you want to be strategic, you need all 9, and it takes all 9 to build that resiliency.
And how did you identify, so how did this process went of, interviewing, I imagine, talking to the top level, but I imagine also throughout the organizations of these 9 companies, how did you identify these 9 elements? How did it come to surface?
Yeah, it was such an interesting journey for me, Julius, it began with the fact that I started this back in 2018, back when we hadn't even heard of, COVID or whatever.
Because it's such a fitting book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I just sort of became obsessed with uncertainty, because if you remember 2018 and 2019, the economy was so good. It was so strong.
Yes.
But everybody I talked to, I'd say, how's business? And everybody would answer the same. Oh my gosh, it's so good. But this uncertainty, we were all waiting for the ball to drop.
Yeah.
And that's what made me think, like, why does uncertainty always have to be bad? Like, why do we always think of it as a negative? And what could happen to your business if you believed differently, if you really thought that uncertainty was exactly what you needed to take your company to another level? So I looked for companies that had done that, and there are not many, but I found these 9, and it was just, I had no idea. I had no thought of a formula. I had no thought of 1 step versus 9 steps. I didn't have any idea. I was uncertain of how this was going to unfold.
Yeah.
And I just started doing the interviews and taking copious notes and listening. And it was, I imagine this is how a sculptor feels when they, take clay and something reveals itself. That's exactly what happened for me, is that I just did these interviews and I listened and I would take notes and I would go back and I'd look at it. And I was like, it's as plain as the nose on my face, is that this is what you have to do. It just came out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this has been, because you published last August. So it's been basically 3 years, 3.5 years.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, it was, the book was close to done in around the end of 2019. But I was so busy with my own business that I just couldn't get it to publication. I had a couple of things to finish, and then COVID hit, which was good that I didn't publish it before COVID, because after COVID, the whole bottom fell out of my own business. I mean, I'm a keynote speaker. I travel around the world. I get on planes. I engage with thousands of people. So my whole business blew up, not only my business, but my business model. So I had to go back.
Apply these 9 rules for yourself.
Exactly. And put it into my own business, which really helped me shape the book to another level. And with, you can probably appreciate this, those of us who write books and do things or consult, we're never going to do that in our own business. This is for other people. But once I had to apply it to my own business, it gave me such a different core belief in it, such a different level of understanding, and such a better way to craft it for somebody who stood in my shoes. I really empathized and understood what my reader was going to be going through.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you tell me, Meridith, how did it change, or how did it refine, or how did it become even more articulate by you actually applying it yourself? Because you said the book was finished, but then you applied it, and I imagine there must have been changes and some polishing that you did left and right in sharpening the tool, so to speak. Yeah,
absolutely. So it was a couple of things. Number one, it was the drastic level of it. I never thought that applying this in uncertainty meant a complete wipeout, right? Like I wasn't thinking that I was talking to a reader who had lost everything and was facing the level of fear that I was facing. So it was about taking it a deeper level for that. And then it became really about application. Before I ever took the book to publication, I took every step and applied it to my own business. And in applying it, I had to work a lot of kinks out. Like, it wasn't only the stories around it, but what would the tools need to look like? And what would somebody fundamentally need to know from A to Z if they were going to apply this into their own business? And then it became more a matter of, I didn't know until I applied it to my own business and I reworked the book, that the steps would have to fit together. I didn't realize you'd have to do all 9 and they would have to be done in order. Then the biggest piece, the biggest piece was, I finished the book. I had it all ready to go to publication. And I started to look at my own life and my life of my customers. And I thought, well, this doesn't end at 5 o'clock when we leave the office. This isn't a book just for your professional life. This is about your personal life. I mean, you have to deal with uncertainty in your personal life. So I added another section to the book, and that section was, how do you apply this formula when the you know what hits the fan in your own life, which it did. I mean, we're all dealing with anxiety and depression and spouses and significant others losing jobs and health issues. And so I applied the formula that way, which was never my intention for the book.
That's interesting. You mentioned fear and also anxiety and depression, and especially in times like today, the current times with COVID and with so much change and so quickly changing, and there's another thing. What I've seen a lot is hope, which is another thing I want to touch upon. Yeah, because there's a close relationship. But in this context, and you experience this yourself, you experience this fear, all this anxiety, not knowing when it will end, if it will end, how it will end, how do you deal with that? And this is a personal question, how did you deal with that? And how did you regain yourself from this kind of, like, I think I mentioned it before, where we kind of freeze and be overwhelmed with all the things that we feel that we cannot control at all? Yeah,
the biggest thing is something that I already walked you through. And it's the number one thing that I tell all of my clients when they're dealing with fear, and it's how I deal with it myself. First of all, fear has to come out. I think of fear kind of like a riptide in the ocean. And if you fight a riptide, it will win every time. It'll beat the fire out of you. So if feelings of fear come into you and you fight them, you're going to make them worse. Yeah. But if you allow them to come through you and you allow yourself to feel them, they'll move through you. So the exercise I use with my clients, and I do with myself, is write down everything you're worried about. Everything. You're worried that, your furloughed employees will never come back, that you're in the event space or the restaurant industry and you'll never be allowed to serve people, ever again. People will want to do Zoom for the rest of your life. The government funding will be cut off. Everything that you're fearful about, put it down and separate it into what you can control and what you can't control. The importance of getting it out is, if you don't state your fears, they'll be stuck inside you. You need to get it out, but then you need to look at it and you need to say, I'm very worried that for me, the speaking industry will never come back. I'm scared to death, but I can't do anything about that. There's nothing I can do about that. So once you learn to separate what you can control and what you can't.
Yeah, I love that you say that. What comes up when I say this, a lot of people that know me well, they know I repeat this all the time. It's where focus goes, energy flows. And this is really about where we focus. If we focus on the things that concern us and we bring us fear, we amplify it. And if we focus on the things we can control, obviously that grows. Another thing, what I think is interesting, I had an interview on being present. It was the third interview I did for 39 Ideas for Life, with also a lady from America, Faye Mendel. And she actually talks about experiencing whatever emotion that you have and to move through it. I also had an interview about honesty. It's the same thing, expressing what you feel and experiencing it in the moment to move through it instead of resisting it. So I very much recognize this.
I just want to add that it's not easy to do.
No,
I mean, it's very confronting to do. It's something you have to practice. Yeah. And you won't get good at it the first time, but it's like a muscle, and you build it and you work it. And I told you before we got started that my husband's had foot surgery.
Yes.
Now we hope for the best that will work out, but we could make ourselves crazy with the fear that we have around it. Yeah. But when we focus on what we can control, his nutrition, his exercise, his doctors, we got to focus our energy there.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. You mentioned, or actually I mentioned hope, and you mentioned it on your website. How does hope tie into this? And you're not only a person who brings hope, but also concrete strategies. But I want to hear about hope, because I believe hope is an essential element of it to keep going in difficult times.
Yeah, I think that I think you need hope backed up by concrete strategy. So I love that you put the two in place, because hope is a good start, but it's not enough. And with the book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to give people motivation, belief, hope that there was opportunity even in the face of some of the greatest challenges that they face. So right at the beginning of the book, we looked back 250 years at every challenge almost our world has faced. Everything from economic challenges to wars to health crisis, to all types of things. And in every single timeline, what we put was the crisis, even the, for us here in the US, the World Trade Centers, blowing up. But the invention and the innovation that came after those tragedies. You can look at the world wars that our world has faced, and the advancements in healthcare after those world wars, those advancements in countries and the relationships and the things that that they have done after those tragedies has just been incredible. I think that nature is a great example of it. There's nothing, the rebirth after a fire or a flood. And so when I think about hope, I think it's important for people to look at history, really important to look at history and realize that unfortunately life is full of tragedy. But without the tragedy, we don't get the advancements. And you have to trust that journey.
Yeah. And experience it in order to move through it. It's really an important element. We have to face the discomfort. Actually, what you said, I don't know how you said it, experience the suck.
Yeah, embrace the suck.
Embrace the suck. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a military term. And I love it because there's nothing worse to me than somebody who's all Pollyanna and say, you know what, things are going to be great. We'll get back to work. Everything's going to be great. At the same time, I don't want to be around somebody who is so pessimistic, they're sucking the life out of it. But once you accept your reality, this isn't good. It's, you know what, we're stuck at home, we're whatever. Then you can start to figure out how you're going to get through it.
Yeah. Great. I have one last question. I mean, I have many more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
One last question, and I always like to close with this question. It's a little bit of a difficult question, perhaps, but what question about dealing with uncertainty didn't I ask, which I should have asked?
Wow, that's a really good question. Let's see. One question that you should have asked that you didn't ask. I would say that that were there really any surprises in this research? Were there any things that you didn't see coming that really threw you off?
Well, let me ask the question. Were there any surprises? Were there things that you didn't expect in this research?
Yeah, one of the biggest was it wasn't until one of the companies that I researched failed did I realize that you needed all 9 steps. Brooks Brothers was one of the companies that I researched and I was going to make part of the book. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, they declared bankruptcy. And my publisher called me and said, you must be devastated and that they declared bankruptcy. And I said, actually, I'm not. And he was like, how could you not? You've done all this work. I said, because I'm still going to put them in the book. They violated 2 of the strategies. And in no way, it helped me realize that in no way was I telling the reader, I'm going to guarantee that these companies are going to be around forever, because I can't guarantee that. What I can guarantee is if you use all 9 of these strategies, this is going to position you for success. So that was the biggest surprise to me, was that it took all 9. You couldn't flounder on one. And without you're just not as strong. You're not as resilient without all 9.
Yeah. Another thing comes up. You say we need all 9, but is there one that is the most important one of the 9, or is it equally balanced?
No, it's really equally balanced,
Yeah.
because with without the vision, you don't have the mindset you need. Without conditioning yourself for change, you don't know the landscape you're in. Without collaboration, you're burning resources. Without
Yeah.
values, you won't make the right decisions.
Yeah.
Without securing your base, you'll never be relevant. Without a network, you can't shift and change as you need to. Without a team, you don't have the people on board. And without steadfasting and keep moving, you may have a great strategy, but it's going to go out of date without you ever even realizing it. So
Yeah.
all 9 are really critical.
Yeah, and I imagine they are mutually reinforcing each other.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Meredith, thank you so much. for
Thank
making the
you.
time.